I have a bigger question about China, but I'm going to start it with a smaller question, just because you mentioned earlier something that had gone unnoted by the press. And so let me start with the smaller one, then go to the bigger one. But the smaller one is another thing that went unnoted by the press in the past 2 weeks was that Trump said Taiwan has to move 50% of its chip production capacity to the United States, or we're not going to defend them anymore. And which I thought was just an amazing statement, a really out there statement. I was just wondering if you had a reaction to it.
That's a different way to blow up strategic ambiguity. You know, President Biden, of course, tested the limits of strategic ambiguity when he talked about the hypothetical of, you know, coming to Taiwan's defense. President Trump seems to be kind of taking things in another direction. My reaction to that statement was that on its own, it's very eyebrow raising. But I think a lot of people have sort of discounted individual statements. When you put it together with a series of actions, canceling a transit by the Taiwan president, lie, canceling a defense dialogue, postponing an arms sale, all of which have been, you know, publicly reported. Now you begin to see a pattern of clear signals from this administration that they are kind of downgrading the extent to which the U.S. deterrent message vis-a-vis a Chinese attack on Taiwan, you know, they're downgrading that deterrent message. I think this is not good for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And I think Beijing is taking notice of all of this.
Yeah, no doubt. And, you know, they do think a little more strategically than I think this administration. And I don't know, if I had to place a bet, I would say him taking the tough line with Trump, it may work out better than a lot of other leaders who are sort of cozying up to Trump. Because, you know, one interpretation is that U.S.-China relationship is breaking down right now. Another is that this is a negotiation and that Trump wants a deal with China. And he's given a lot of body language that suggests that he wants a deal with China, including a deal that kind of has a wink and a nod, like, we're not going to give you a hard time on the Taiwan. Just let's get a deal. Because I think he sees China as the main prize out there in the world on the economic front, which is the lens, as you said, he sees it through. And, you know, I know there are other people out there who go, no, things are deteriorating, you know, war is on the horizon. What's your view of the temperature of the relationship right now? And is what we're seeing something long-term, or is this, in fact, part of a negotiation and a kind of a much more tactical?
Well, I think I have to answer that question on two levels. I believe that in the short term, President Trump is looking for a deal with China, as you said, and sees this relationship, as I said, through economic terms. So that deal is basically an economic deal. And by the way, the brackets on the side of that deal are, we're not going to be as concerned about the South China Sea or Chinese support for Russia in the war against Ukraine or even Taiwan. What we want is a deal about trade deficit, investment, these kinds of things. So I think Trump is very focused on that. And I think she recognizes that and also sees some value in the stabilizing effect of a negotiation towards that deal. But I think China is nervous about making it too big a deal because they don't know if it'll stick or not. And so they would probably prefer just piecemeal progress over time. And B, I don't think it changes the underlying competitive dynamics, structural competitive dynamics between the U.S. and China, and that China is going to continue with its longer-term strategy and do so to gain advantage against the United States in technology, with respect to the question of military deterrence, with respect to global diplomacy, and with respect to driving wedges between the U.S. and our allies. A project that, you know, I had a friend who was recently in China who's talking to Chinese scholars, and they were saying, look, we've had a strategy to try to separate you from your allies. You seem to just be doing it for us. So I don't actually think what's happening here tactically in the near term changes the long-term nature of the U.S.-China competition. But I think in the short term, it may lead to pronouncements out of a meeting between Trump and Xi later this month. If Trump goes to China early next year, some more pronouncements. But we should not lose sight of this longer term trend because I think it remains on pace.